Hey guys, it's Steve here, and it is time. It is time, people. I am excited. Are you excited? You should be excited, because in this video, we are finally taking our first look at how to use Blender 2.8's new render engine, EEVEE. In this beginner guide, you will learn how to render a scene like the one you see right here. So you might not believe it, but this scene is completely being rendered right now in real time. So the quick answer to the question that a lot of you probably have right now is no, Blender 2.8 is not yet officially released. This is still running the alpha, but I found that the alpha has been quite stable recently, and I'm getting some really good results. And the official Blender release won't be coming until early 2019 now, as there's still going to be a beta phase and there's some more bug fixes to come. But the overall UI/EEVEE should stay relatively the same, and if there's any major UI changes that makes this video hard to follow, I will put it in the description in a pinned comment at the top, so you guys can check that to see if you're missing anything, if you have an issue. But without further ado, let's start real-time rendering some crazy stuff in Blender 2.8. But first I want to quick talk about this video tutorial sponsor, Anime Render. Anime Render is a large render farm with support for all the major 3D software options available. They offer some of the best pricing and offer free trial renders. It's easy to sign up, and you can get $10 free render credit when you use the coupon code CGGeek. Then to get started rendering, it's as easy as just selecting your software, uploading your finished project ready for render, fill out a few basic settings, select your uploaded project, and render. You will receive a notification when your render is finished and ready for download. Check them out with the link in the description below. If you've been living under a rock and possibly haven't heard about what Blender 2.8's EEVEE render engine is, it's a real-time render engine, similar to a game render engine, but it's built right into Blender, and it can render things in real time. So you can see, like this scene here, for example, is being completely rendered in real time. I can move my camera around and everything is updating to the camera. If I was going to grab an object like this, I could move the object around, and you can see that everything is being rendered in real time. So how cool is that? Really cool, and I'm excited to show you guys exactly how to start using it. Alright, so quick taking one last look at our finished scene here. You can see we have all kinds of screen space reflections. We have some puddles here. You can see we have reflections from the vehicle in the puddles there. We have some real-time particles actually falling. If I go to the camera view here and play it back, you can see that I have some snow falling on this scene. And then as the camera pulls up closer to the car here, you can see we have some water droplets even on our vehicle here. So taking a closer look real quick at that, I've done this with some bump mapping and some reflections to get what looks like water droplets across the top of our car and over on the windshield here. This renders way faster than doing it with a particle system I found. I tested both systems, and this was the way to go. And you can see it looks really cool. It looks like this car has just been sitting out there in the rain/snow. It's now snowing. It's left maybe on a bridge here. And you can also see that we have some assets rendering. These are from my realistic nature asset pack. Yes, the asset pack will be compatible with Blender 2.8 once it's officially released. You can already see that they're looking pretty cool in Blender 2.8 though. And they're just going to get better as I kind of optimize them a little bit more. But that's going to do it, guys. This is going to be the scene we recreate. I'm only covering EEVEE in this tutorial, so there's a lot of new stuff in Blender 2.8 that I'm excited to share with you guys. But I'm only going to cover EEVEE right now, because other things are more likely to change and stuff, and it will be too much for one video. Okay, so here's a simple scene that we'll be starting with to render. This is just a simple car model that I got off BlendSwap. There'll be a link to it in the description, but I'll also include this whole unrendered scene for you guys, to a starter file for you guys to follow along with in the link in the description, so you guys can jump in and do exactly what I'm doing and create something cool yourself. Now before I go any further, you might notice the paint spots here on my my shirt, and that's because I actually just got finished painting my little home studio that I'm building, and I'm really excited about this. I'll be moving out to it actually in a month or so probably, and this is all made possible because of you guys through Patreon. You guys have been supporting me, and I really appreciate it. And if you haven't yet checked out my Patreon page, there'll be a link in the description where you can see some of the cool perks you can get, and I'll also be posting some updates on my little home studio project there pretty soon. But for now, let's just take a moment to appreciate how cool the new UI looks in Blender 2.8. It's pretty amazing, and the developers have done a really great job. It's still improving, it's still changing, but I approve. It is looking really cool. There's still a few things that will take a little bit of time to get used to, but yeah, let's just jump in and start creating some materials. So right here, this is the default EEVEE kind of scene that you'll get. You have your render settings here, and it's set to EEVEE. You want to make sure you leave that. And if you click up here to your shading options, you can just click the rendered viewport, and this is what it looks like right now, rendered in EEVEE. We have no lighting or anything, so it's just a flat object as you see here. So let's right off the bat, let's do that. Let's add some lighting to this scene. So to do that, we're just going to switch over to our world materials, just like cycles. You can click use nodes, and we're going to open up an HDR. Now for this scene, I'm kind of going with what has already become the classic scene for EEVEE renders, and that's that evening, sort of wet, foggy look that I've seen a lot of EEVEE renders already come out with, and I think it's because it does it very well and it's one of its strong points. So I figured, why not? We'll stick with a theme and we'll create an evening foggy road with a vehicle on it that's wet from the falling snow. I thought it was kind of cool. So let's open up that HDR map I'm talking about. So we're going to go ahead and click on the color here, change it to environment texture just like cycles. You can see it's purple because there's no texture, and we're just going to open up that texture, the HDR. Again, there'll be a link in the description for it, but this is just an HDR from HDR Haven, Shanghai bound, Shanghai I think it's called. Go ahead and open it up, give it a second, and then you can see we have our HDR loaded, and it's already rendering perfectly smooth in real time, and you can see it looks pretty cool. Alright, so first off, you'll see that we have a material already added here. Just ignore that. We'll be recreating the material, so don't worry about that material that's showing up there. And yeah, let's go ahead and turn down the intensity of this a little bit. We can go to our strength here, tune it back a little bit. We'll go down to about a 0.5, as that looks a little bit more evening-ish. And then I want to rotate the HDR around, so we have the cities in the background here, and the trees more on this side. So to do that, again, it's just like it is in 2.79 using cycles. I'm just going to go ahead and split my window by grabbing down in the lower corner here, dragging over, and we're going to change this now to our shader editor. Let me see right here. So this is something that's a little different already in 2.8, is the option is up here instead of, I think it used to be down here. So you want to just get used to that. It's up in the top corner instead of the bottom corner. And now it's going to be the shader editor that we want to grab there. Let me give ourselves a little bit more room here. And I'm going to hit T to close off, or N to close off the properties tab there. Now, because we're changing the world settings, we're going to change it from object right here in the drop down now to world. Change that to world, and then all we have to do is scroll out a little bit until we see our nodes here. You can see our HDR is plugged in there, and just like you would in cycles, we're going to add in an input, a texture coordinate, and then a vector mapping node. All we have to do is connect the generated to the vector, and the vector to the vector. Speaking about vector, I like these vector curves, the straight lines. I know you could have set that up before, but it's just a default now in 2.8, and it's cool. I like it. It's a little cleaner looking. So now I just want to rotate our HDR about 180 degrees. So I'm going to rotate it 180 along the Z axis right here. And you can see there we have it. We got some cities in the background, and we have the trees to our front there. Pretty cool. So that's it for our HDR for now. And let's move on to some materials. So let's start with our road. We're going to start with this road. That's kind of a beat up road. I have a few like grungy spots on it. There's some puddles forming. Obviously it doesn't drain very well. So I'm just going to give myself a little bit of space here, make this window a little bit smaller here so we don't need too much room for our ground texture, and I'll have more room to work in my shader editor here. And I'm going to change it from world back to object, and then I'm going to select the ground here. We'll go to our material editor here. We want the road material there, and I'm just going to go zoom out a little bit. We should have a basic principled shader. This is the basic default shader now for EEVEE. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first enable the Node Wrangler add-on, which is already compatible with 2.8. That's pretty cool. A lot of the add-ons need to be updated for 2.8, but the Node Wrangler is already done. Oh, that's another thing. The user preferences now is in the edit menu, so that's where you're going to have to go to find your add-ons. So go ahead to your add-ons there. We'll start typing in Node Wrangler. And there's our add-on. Now, it's a good time to save just because I'm thinking of it, and it's good to constantly be saving just because 2.8 is in progress. There's going to be some crashes here and there and stuff. I've noticed that it's not been that bad, but you will have an occasional crash, so make sure you save often. Alright, so starting off, let's go ahead, and now we have that Node Wrangler add-on enabled, so it will help speed up our workflow a little bit here. I'm just going to go Shift-A, add in a texture, add image texture. I'm going to open this up, and this is a PBR texture. I believe this one is from textures.com. I'm not positive. It could also be from Texture Haven. Either way, it'll be linked in the description. Those are my two go-to websites right now for PBR materials. And this is an asphalt material. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up the albino color texture here. This is going to be the base color for our road. So connect that to the base color there. And you'll see right away it updates immediately in EEVEE, and you can see exactly what you're getting. And it's pretty cool, but the texture needs to be scaled way down as it's way too large. So all I need to do is, just like I did before with our environment map, I'm going to add in a texture coordinate and then Shift A, add in a vector mapping. And just like in Cycles, we're going to use the UV here. And just like in Cycles, you can change these coordinates, but what's super cool is you see a real-time response to every time you change a scale. You could even animate this and see it in real time happening in your viewport. So that's super cool. Now the scale of this I think is about 20 by 20 that I found look good. So you go ahead and do that, and you have a nice fine sort of rock texture there. It looks pretty cool. Maybe a little bit bigger. Maybe these could be a little bit bigger rocks in the asphalt there. And that looks kind of cool. We'll go to an 18. Alright, so next up we need to add in the normal map for that. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this texture here, and we're just going to change it. I'm going to click that button there to the normal map here, and then I want to change it from color to non-color data, as this is what you want to use for your roughness, your bump, and your normal maps, because you don't want it to be color, it's non-color data. Connect the vector to the vector, and then go ahead and Shift A. We're going to add in a, let me see, it's a vector, a normal map. Drop the color into the color here on your normal map, and then you want to choose your UV map there. And you can drop the normal into the normal on your PBR node and give it a second, and there you have it. You get normal mapping showing up already on your object. It looks really cool. We really don't have to tweak any of these settings. You can make it even more intense if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it at 1 for now, as I think that looks like a cool road, but it looks like a really nice road. And that's a problem. We don't want a really nice road. We want kind of a beat-up road. So we're going to solve that in a second here. Let me first go ahead and add in the roughness map. So the roughness map, I'm just going to do the same thing with duplicating our texture. We'll go ahead and duplicate our texture that we already set to non-color data. Connect the vector to it, and let's go ahead and open up that roughness texture right here. We'll plug this into the roughness on our PBR principled shader node here, and you can see that we have very little shine. Now this is good for maybe a sunny afternoon texture, as it's flat and you don't have much reflections, but this is a wet road. We want to make it look wet. So to do that, we're going to control our roughness here with a color ramp. I'm going to drop in a converter color ramp. And using this, we can go ahead and increase the amount of wetness on our road. Now I found flipping the values here looks better. So I'm going to click that button to flip the coordinates. And you can see it's already looking super wet. I'm going to want to cut that back a little bit. So I'm grabbing my white bar here and pulling it in a ways so you can see it looks a bit better. You get some of that reflections off your HDR map and stuff, but it's not coming across crazy strong. So I think that looks, let me see here. I'm comparing it to my finished scene here. I think it looks pretty good. You could actually bring up, let me see, bring this down a little bit more. Yeah. And then you can bring up the blacks here a little bit, and you get just a little bit more of that sharp reflection that looks real wet. And that's looking great. That's all we have to do for our rock texture. Now it's time to break it up and make it look like there's two materials interacting with each other here. And to do that, so this is our basic material for our asphalt here, but I want some potholes in that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our whole material here, just B, and grab it all, and I'm going to go Shift D and pull it down here, so we have two of the same materials essentially. I'm going to change the textures now on this one over to a dirt kind of pothole material. So I'm going to start with our albino material here. Let me jump back here. I'm going to go to our rough brick material. And if I click this button here, I believe this one is from Texture Haven. Again, it will be linked. You can grab your brown mud there, and then that's going to be our color. And if I go Control Shift onto that shader, you can see what the brown mud is looking like. You can't really see it too well until we change the normal map. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the normal map there. Grab our new material here, the rough brick, and then grab the normal map for the rough brick right there. And now you can see we're really getting some muddy looking textures there. It's looking pretty cool. Same thing with the roughness. We have to grab that rough brick roughness map. So brown mud roughness right there. And then you have it. You have some real looking, gross looking mud. And it's looking pretty cool. Now the one thing I found I wanted to do is I wanted to not have this texture tiled as many times. So I'm going to go ahead and change my mapping node here to 14. And you can see it's tiled a little less. And it looks like wet mud, and it's pretty cool looking. I just like saying mud. It looks like mud. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little less reflective here by cranking down the black and pulling the white over a little bit. Just as it's a little bit over the top reflective right now, I think. Something like that. And then you can also take this value and make it a little less black, and that will take away a little bit of the sharpness of it, of the sharp reflection to it. So I like to do that, just make it a little less intense there by making that a grayer color. And let's combine these two materials now to get ourselves some potholes. So to do that, it's first going to need a factor of what should be pothole and what shouldn't be. And to do this, we're going to create a very simple noise texture. I'm going to go texture, noise texture right there. We're going to drop in a converter color ramp right here and connect the color to the color ramp. This is a little combo node that I use all the time, a texture, node texture, and a color ramp. Go ahead and jump to that by Control-Shift, left-clicking on that color ramp, and with Node Wrangler, you can see it happening in real time here. Then I can go ahead and grab the blacks, pull them up, grab the whites, pull them down, and you might have already guessed this is going to be our mask, basically, between these two materials. Now I want to change the scale to be a bit more large, a little bit larger. So I'm going to go about a 15 or maybe a 10 would be better. So we have some potholes there and looks pretty cool. Now everywhere it's white is going to be a pothole. So we might want to crank the whiteness down a little bit, make it a little less intense, and then we can give a little bit of detail to our noise texture here, just to make it look like it's a little bit more cracked and detailed. And that looks pretty cool. Maybe just a little less pothole still, something like that. Looks pretty cool. And that will be our factor. So now with our two node setups here, I'm just going to add in a shader, mix shader. The bottom mud is going to go in the bottom of our mix shader here. And our top asphalt is going to go in the top here. And our noise texture with our color ramp is going to be the factor. So you drop that into the factor. And now when we connect our shader up to our output, I'm just going to Control-Shift-click it. You can see, give it a second, to update, and you can see here that we now have little potholes of mud here, these areas that are dirty looking right here, and then you have your asphalt material everywhere else. And this is what's controlling the intensity of the mud and how much of it is in your scene. So for this to really look like a pothole, it needs to be kind of sunken down into the ground, and we can do that with a little bit of bump mapping. So because we already have this texture here, and we already have a normal map right here in our mud material, all I have to do is give ourselves a little bit of room here, Shift A, add in a new vector, and this one is going to be a bump node. You just drop it right in there, so the normal from the normal map is connected to the normal on the bump map. And now we have this height option, and this is going to be what we use to control how high this pothole is. So with that right there, all we have to do is grab our color ramp and plug this right into the height option on that little bump node. I'm just going to drop it in right there, make sure I got it. Yes, I did. Pull it over a little bit here so we can see it. Might help to kind of pull these nodes down to the middle here, just so we can kind of get a little closer in. And you can see that right now it's being popped up out of the ground like it's coming out, and we want it to be the opposite direction. So we can go ahead and click invert on our node there and give it a second to update, and that's going to about do it. Now all we have to do is tweak the settings on our bump node here, take the strength down to about a 0.5 so it looks a little less intense, and then take the distance down to a 0.5. Whoops, strength down to 0.5. There you go, and you can see that we have what looks a lot more like potholes now in the ground. You can control the strength however you want, pick something that looks cool. You don't want to go too strong though. And yeah, that's looking pretty cool. Maybe these potholes are a little too small, so you can always go up here, change your scale, bring them down to about a 7 or so, and yeah, kind of distribute the potholes differently if you want a different look. But I think that's looking just all right. And that's going to do it for the potholes. Now the one thing that's left is most roads have a few painted lines on them, especially if it's a bridge like this might be here. So we need to throw some painted lines on there. And instead of using the new texture painting tools that Blender 2.8 has, I'm really excited to actually jump into those, but I'm not going to do that for this tutorial because there might still be changing and stuff. And I'm just going to do kind of a simple cheaty way for this, and that's to use a texture. I'm just going to grab a road texture here. So we want to add this texture to our asphalt right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate our asphalt color texture here. I'm going to open up a road texture real quick. Let me jump back here. Got a basic roads texture. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to duplicate the mapping node as well, so we can control where it's placed on our scene. I'm just going to drop it right in here. And I found the values for this are 1.25. This is something you can play around with, of course, if you need to. And 3. Now if I drop the vector into this vector and Control-Shift-click that road texture, you'll see we have roads. Of course, they're running the wrong direction, and that's because you need to rotate it 90 degrees on the Z right here as well. So then you can go ahead and play along with the location here just to get it lined up right on your road. Find right about there looks right. Whoop, a little bit off. It's about a 17.2 meter, if you guys are wondering, a negative 17.2. So there's the settings to get the texture lined up on this scene. Pretty simple. 1.25, 3, rotate it 90 degrees, and then tweak the location. So once you have that color laid out here, all we have to do is use a color. Let me go color, mix RGB, drop it in there. We're going to change this to difference, and I'm going to connect this then to the bottom. And then using this, I'm going to control how much color is kind of added to our scene here. If you take a look at the texture now, you can see we still have that asphalt texture with the color kind of overlaid. And that looks pretty good. If I go to my final texture here, you can see we have the colors over with the potholes kind of interrupting the paint a little bit here, wherever it's, let me see right here where it kind of overlays it a bit. And it's looking pretty cool. We got a beat up road here that's looking very wet. So you can leave your texture like this and it would look really good. But there are two things left that I want to add to this, and that are some cracks and some puddles. So both those things will make this look really cool. I mean, it looks pretty cool as it does right now, but we can make it look even better, and that's some cracks and some puddles. So you can see our material node here is already looking pretty impressive, but we can make it a little bit better without really adding that much more work. So to do this, it's pretty simple. We're just going to, first of all, let's steal a texture coordinate and a mapping node here real quick. I'm just going to Shift D those up here for one last texture, and that's going to be a crack texture. So I'm going to go Shift A, or actually let me just duplicate this texture right here, connect the vector up right there, and let's open up this last texture. This one's from CG Textures, and I'll link to it in the description, but it's a grunge mask here. If I show you guys what it looks like, it's cracks like you see here. And that actually looks like it's mapped pretty well across our scene. I might just want to stretch it in a little bit on the x-axis here, take it down to about a 15. So we have it a 15, 18. Alright, so now this is going to control the bump values on our two different nodes. So I want to throw this into a color ramp first. So we're going to go converter color ramp right there. And I'm just going to pull the whites up a little bit more so it's really masked nicely there. As you can see here, we have it masked in there pretty well. And this is going to be the factor to add some bump to both of these shaders. Now the one thing is, it looks way too repeated though, and that's a problem. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to steal the little node noise texture color ramp that we created here. And like I mentioned earlier, I use this a lot. I'm just going to go ahead and Shift D it so we copy it up to the top here. And I'm going to change some of these factors a little bit, give a little bit more detail, a little bit of distortion, about a 0.4, and then make the scale, maybe we'll go 4. So if I take a look at that, you can see it's a nice sort of noise texture across our image there. Maybe a 4.5 would be good. And I'm going to take this and go color, mix RGB, and we're going to multiply the black values over our texture here to make it less repetitive looking. So to plug this into the bottom, or into the top here, I'm sorry, and you want this noise texture in the bottom, we go multiply to a factor of 1, And if I control shift left click that to see what happens, we only have that crack texture in certain areas across our scene, and I think it looks just fine. So with that said and done, all I have to do is for our normal map here on our asphalt texture, I need to add in that bump map, just like I did on the bottom dirt texture down there, the mud. I'm going to add in that bump node there, and all I have to do is connect this to the height. With that dropped in there, we want to choose invert again, and you can take the distance down a little bit, and the strength can stay around 1, maybe just under. And if we go to that texture now, you can see that we have cracks in our road, and it looks pretty cool. You can again take the distance down a little bit more to make it a little less strong, and maybe a little bit higher than that though, 0.4, and then we'll take the strength down to about a 0.5. So we have some nice cracks in our road, and then let's go ahead and add those to the mud as well. So down here we have our mud, our bump node here for the mud already, and all I want to do is add this to our bump texture that's already here. So to do that, I'm just going to add in one more color mix RGB, drop it right in there, and I'm going to change it to multiply. This is going to be black in the bottom, and this is going to be the factor of what makes this black. So essentially I can take our cracks texture here now, I can put it in as the factor, and if you look at this, this is going to be now the cracks is going to be the factor of what black is. So basically it controls what is black in the image now. It controls what is added black. So if I go to this texture here by control shift clicking, you can see it's just our cloud texture that's controlling where our mud is. But now I click on it and we have our black cracks going through it. It's not real visible, you can see it right here, but it's working. And if you want to make it more visible, what you can do is just drop in a very simple converter math, drop it right in there, change it to multiply, and this basically just changes the intensity of the value. So if I cranked it up to something pretty high, like a 10, you'd see it's nice and visible now as that factor is multiplied by 10. So there you have it. Very easy. I know it looks a little confusing, but it's very easy. And if you guys need to pause the video at any time, go ahead. And we have a super sweet looking realistic road here that has mud, it has cracks, it has paint, it has bump maps and reflections and everything you could want. But does it have puddles? No. And that's because we're going to add the puddles right now. So for the puddles, we're going to yet again steal our little noise, texture, and color ramp node setup here. And I'm just going to shift D it down here towards the end of our node tree now, which is looking quite impressive, I might add. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in a mix shader here. So shader, mix shader. And now I'm going to drop in a glossy shader. This is going to be what controls the puddles. So finally adding a new shader in, and it's going to be the glossy shader. Now I want this to be a very sharp glossiness, not a rough glossy, as it's going to be more reflective if it's sharper. So I'm going to turn this to about a 0.03. So it'll be nice and reflective in those puddles. And now this is going to be the bottom shader here, so you can go ahead and connect that up. Now we want this noise texture to be controlling where we have puddles. Of course, we don't want it to be exactly where this cracks, so I'm going to go ahead and change some of these values a little bit. I'm going to give it a little bit of distortion. We'll give it about a 0.2 or so, I think would be good. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of a different scale. So we'll crank the scale up a bit. And now if I jump to here, I'm just going up to about an 8, so we have some random puddles. Now if we jump to here, we can control exactly where those puddles are. The white areas will be the puddles, and the black areas will be our ground. And you can see that that's looking pretty good. Maybe a little less detail, as the puddles are a little bit too detailed to be realistic there. So we'll take that down to about a 3, and or maybe even a 2. And that's looking like some mud puddles right there. So all we have to do now is this is going to control the factor, the white value. So if you don't want these puddles to be 100% like boom in your face, you can take this down to a grayer color there, and it will control the factor. As if it's black, it'll be completely gone, and if it's white, it'll be 100% there. And then we just drop this into the factor. If I go to our mix shader there, you can see, give it a second to update here, that we have puddles everywhere that this texture is. Let me quick save our project there. And I'm just kind of giving it a glancing reflection here. You can really see where those puddles are. And of course, in changing this intensity, you'll see those puddles even more. Like right here, we have one of those nice puddles. And if I look at it at an angle like this, you can see that those puddles are reflecting the city lights, whereas back here, we're not getting any reflections, as that puddle is reflective because of this glossy shader. So that's pretty cool right there. And the last thing to make this look even more cool is going to be to add a little bit of bump to our puddle. So to do this, it's just that converter bump node that we've already used a few times. Just go ahead and add in vector bump. Connect the normal to the normal on your glossy shader. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in a color ramp and a noise texture, just like we've been using. In fact, I'm going to steal these two, because I've been stealing them for this whole material, and why stop now? So with that said and done, I want this to be a very detailed bump, as it's going to be like little waves or little noised materials, I should say, on our little puddle here. So I'm going to make this scale about a 300. And then I'm just going to open up the black and white here a little bit. And I want it to have a decent amount of detail. So I'm going to give this about a 7 in the detail. And then the distortion can be pretty high. We can go up to about a 2. And if we take a look at what that's looking like, you can see we have like little wavelets, like little disruptions in the water, which would be in the puddles. And all we have to do now is have this control the height. And boom, you did it. If you go and look at your final result now, you can see, give it a second to load. Now, believe it or not, this is the most challenging material in this whole scene. So if you're getting through this and having fun, you're going to love the rest of this video. Just so you're not feeling intimidated at this point, it's really not that hard. But there we go. Now, the details in that wave are way too strong. So I'm going to crank the distance down to a 0.1. So that's a little less intense. And now I'm going to take the strength down to a 0.03. Something very small, but you can see that there's still a little bit of that detail now in that puddle. If I crank the strength up, it totally gets way too detailed. But just a little bit gives it the look of water, and that looks pretty cool. So there we have it, guys. We have our ground, our color, our cracks, our puddles, our mud, everything adding up to make a really cool looking material here. Alright, now we'll wrap up part 1 of our little 2-part tutorial series where we learn to use Blender 2.8's EEVEE render engine. I hope you're having fun like I am, and if you're ready to start rendering that car and some of the awesome lighting in the remaining of the scene, go ahead and check out part 2. It should be up already. There'll be a link on the screen somewhere, and I'll see you over there. Bye!